Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Quincy Carrier. This is Quincy Carrier Live. We got a fun show for you guys today. We're going to talk about the Browns and the many questions that they have when it comes to how they're going to handle the draft. And to help me do some of that, we got Jacob Roach in today. Jacob, how are you feeling, man?
Dude, I'm feeling pretty good. You got a chance to get to the number one overall pick, and it kind of makes you feel like this crap storm's been worth it.
It's going to be interesting to see, like, because it's not just like, hey, they could get the number one overall pick. But I think also what's important is like how it stacks for them to get the number one overall pick, because there are a couple of scenarios that I find to be truly interesting. Um, when you look at this draft, is there a guy you're like, oh yeah, you know what, might just be worth the pick itself?
Yeah, yeah. Here's the thing. So if I'm looking at like a scenario where you are trying to get a franchise quarterback this year instead of just a bridge quarterback or whatever, it's getting the number one overall pick and getting Cam Ward to me. Like, I think that's the only way I'm like all on board of first round, making a big splash, trying to get a quarterback. I think Travis Hunter is a really, really special talent that's worthy of that kind of situation as well. But if you think you're going to go into this draft and get you a franchise quarterback, I think you have to have the number one pick to do that.
Yeah, I'm a bit iffier on Cam Ward. I know that the talent is there with him. My big concerns come with like he's been in college football so long. He's played so much college football that like some of the decisions he makes, I don't feel like are coach outable, right? Like
Yeah.
that's my big thing with him, where it's like you got to make a determination at some point if you feel like he can learn from those mistakes and cut that out. But it kind of feels like to me, it's like there's part of that. Remember, we were having this conversation with Jameis where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
how long until we just realize he's just going to throw interceptions, right? Like he's just going to make these decisions. And like Cam's played so much football in college, right? Washington State a couple of years, Incarnate Word.
Yeah.
I get he was a triple option guy in high school, right? So maybe that factors into it. But that's the big question with me is like, will his shot selection ever be what you want it to be? And also, as far as fit for what the Browns like to do, I have my concerns because like the Browns run a system where you need a quarterback with that timer in his head, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
And I have that same concern with Shador, where I'm like, there are times where I'm like, where's that timer? How's it not going off yet? Like you got to get rid of that ball. And that's what thrives in this kind of system. I think maybe if there were another team that were looking like, if there's somebody who has like an Andy Reid disciple that's looking for a quarterback, Cam Ward might work, because I think in order for that thing to work, you have to be willing to say, hey, look, I'm gonna just deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? Like in the same way that Andy, like I made this point talking to RGR Football, who covers the Chiefs, and I was like, the one thing I think people don't get about quarterbacks and what's going to work at the quarterback position, what's going to end up being successful, is there also has to be a match of what your coach is okay with and what your skill set is and isn't. Mm-hmm. Right? If you are always, as a coach, wishing that you had somebody else, or just if I could just tinker this thing, that's not going to be a successful relationship at the quarterback position, because you're always at some level going to be asking this guy to be something he's not.
Yeah, I get that.
And I always worry about that with quarterbacks when you're especially when you're talking about, first round, you draft a guy in the first round, it's a marriage, right? Yeah. Like you're getting married to that quarterback. And the same way, I would consider if I were to get married, hey, do they like, if they snore in the bed, I got to not care about that, right? Like I can't sit here and be like, well, if they just stop snoring, it's going to be a great, like they snore in the bed. That's just what it is, right? And with Cam Ward, that's the thing where I stumble upon where I'm like, if Kevin and Andrew look at it, and when I look at it, I go, oh, this is so much here I want him to not do anymore, right? And if that's the case, I think that's something where you have to say to yourself, it just isn't going to be a situation for you to be successful with.
You want to, and so I've been thinking about this just a lot because for the longest time we were almost at the tail end of the top 10, right? We were picking 8th forever, like all my mocks and everything. I was assuming they had no shot at any quarterback, that because counting Cam and Shadur, because they were outside of the top 5, and I was like, yeah, they're not going to get there. But one thing I think about with Cam Ward and some of the decision making and stuff, I will say when I watch this season, his pocket presence is significantly better than it was at Washington State. So I do think I've seen some improvements, not like massive improvements where he's a completely different player or anything of that nature. I just think he's taken a step forward, and he's got a special. I disagree. People saying none of these quarterbacks are going to be anything special. He's got top 10 quarterback arm talent to me. Like Cam Ward has got the arm talent. If you just look strictly on, like, if you go back and watch what he did in the first half this week in his bowl game, it is the ball jumps off his hands. Right? Like, he's fling that like other guys can't. And that's what kind of makes me teeter towards like, oh, I'd like to take a chance. But one thing I think about with him and some of the decision making and some of the interceptions, he had to be Superman because of that defense all year long. Like, had to be he had to put the team on his back because his defense couldn't stop a cold. And how much of some of those situations were similar to what we were talking about with Jameis. Well, he's throwing the ball 50 or 60 times and he's got to do it all on his own. Can you bring Cam in here and figure out like, hey, maybe if we throw it 30, 35 times and complement that with a run game, does that kind of change some of that stuff? I think a little bit. I don't know how far it goes, but like, I think we kind of are on the same page, a lot of us, in thinking like 2025 is a semi make or break for Kevin and Andrew. Like they've got it, like something's got to be successful. If you're going to take a chance on a long-term quarterback project, he has the tools to do it. But if somebody also offers you a king's ransom for that first overall pick, I might not lose my mind over that either. Like, if we get there.
My rule with quarterback is I think you should always avoid, especially in the top 10. If you do not believe, and like if this is what, like if the Raiders believe this, if the Browns believe this, then like at the end of the day, I have no problem with it. But like if you don't personally believe, hey, this is one of the 5 best players in that draft at quarterback, you should really stay away from drafting that guy in the top 5, right? Because again, you're committing to that guy. Like this isn't the second round, third round. That's time where it's like, okay, well, let's just see, right? Because it's a 1 or 2 round commitment or 2-year commitment. But when you're going top 5 in the first round, he's going to play year 1. Like you can act like it's not going to happen. I remember they were like, "Oh, Drake May's not going to play. Michael Penix is definitely not going to play." Yeah, sure, okay. It's never happened, right? Like you're gonna play. Lamar Jackson played in year 1. He was the 32nd pick in the draft. I think even Teddy Bridgewater played in year 1. Like they're gonna play. If you draft them in round 1, they're gonna play. I also like have this like fallacy too, because I think people change their mind on it because it's like later in the first.
Yeah,
I think a first round pick's a first round pick, dude. Like if that quarterback is not the guy, then like it's gonna have a similar effect because like the Steelers hung on to Kenny Pickett for like 2 years when it was obvious, like 3 games into it. Okay, yeah, man, this ain't gonna be it, right? But he was a first round pick. You got to stick with it. So I'm always like extra strict when it comes to first round quarterbacks. And then like once we get into 3rd round, 4th round, I'm a little bit looser than most people, right? I'm like, well, you do it, right? Take 2 if you want to.
Yeah.
Right? Like I really don't have a problem with it. I know some people are like, oh, you can't waste a 3rd round pick. You gotta get a starter. And if you think that you might be able to strike gold and get like, slower Russell Wilson with Dylan Gabriel, then go ahead and do it, right? Like, and see what happens. Because if it works out, then nobody's gonna care. But if it doesn't, okay. Like,
Yeah, it's a third-round pick. You could just be like, well, how
look
many
at that
third-round
2023 draft and how amazing it is. It doesn't matter that DTR is not any good, right? Like, it changes nothing about how you feel about that draft class. So it's like, to me, once you get to like late day 2, day 3, I'm a little bit more lenient with quarterback. But I got to be a believer in you to take you in the first round. And that has been my issue with quarterback this year. Is like, I can't get myself to believe in Shador like that. Yeah. I can't get myself to believe in Cam Ward like that, or anybody else in this class. Like even like somebody who's not going to be in this class, like Aller, I'm like, I'll be nervous still. I'll be super nervous. Like, I could see why the fit would be there. It would be like the most seamless transition of what you have built, but I would still be very nervous about it. And I don't want to be nervous, right? Because if you're taking a quarterback in the top 5, you shouldn't be hoping. You should be believing. Like, that's right. Good. And that's my thing. It's like, if you want to draft the quarterback in the top 5, that's cool. But like, I think they should have that conversation. Are we hoping or are we believing? Because like, you're in a dangerous spot here if you're the Browns, where you can be talked into hoping. And hope at the quarterback position is not the same as getting a quarterback, right? Like, I think a lot of people are advocating to have some hope at the quarterback position for a couple of months. But what's that going to turn into if that guy goes out there and you spent top whatever pick on him and he's not any good? Yeah, it's going to turn into fire very fast. And I think if you're the Browns, if you're Andrew Berry, you want to say, well, you want to continue to be employed by the Browns. The important thing is that we end next year feeling like, okay, we're on the right track. That doesn't mean you got to win 14 games. That doesn't mean you got to get to the conference championship. It doesn't even necessarily mean you make the playoffs, right? It just means that, hey, we feel like there's a pathway that we can see, like, okay, this could be successful. And then if you line up with the quarterback in 2026 and you have something built there, I think that's kind of the path forward. The way I look at it, if I'm the Browns, and you tell me how you feel about this, I just dropped a video on my channel about it. You need to build that nest. Like, this is I don't think there's a single guy that I'm like, okay, I want to commit to long-term at quarterback this offseason. So I think there's an opportunity here. I want to build a nest, and I think the best way to build a nest around a quarterback is to start with defense. Yeah. Defense helps you win games. It is the most universal rule of football. I know people think it's basic and it's like, but literally look at every mediocre quarterback you've ever seen win a championship or do anything. Look at what the Browns did last year. Look at what Joe Flacco lost to the New York Giants, dog, this week. Okay. Like, what we seen DTR. Can you imagine that guy could win a game in the NFL? What he did last year with an elite defense against the Pittsburgh Steelers of all teams. This is one of these universal truths in football. You want to be able to give a guy a chance to develop, you got to have a great defense. Because what that does is allow you to have a chance to win games. And a quarterback's not going to stay on the field if you can't win. Like, it's just not going to happen. You can't win. You're not going to stay on the field. You're not going to develop. So build that defense. I think you have a golden opportunity in front of you. Get one of these blue chip guys on this defensive line. At worst, Abdul Carter can be like like a lighter but way more bendy, way more effective Obo Okoronkwo. Cool, fine. Like, yeah. And if he picks up weight and he maintains that bend, he's Von Miller. Like, then you got Von Miller and Myles Garrett basically on the same defensive line. Go ahead, do that. If you want to get Mason Graham, go get Mason Graham. Like, go get somebody good defensively. And then I think about the run game there. I saw the Philadelphia Eagles put 41 up on the Cowboys. And remember, it's a Cowboys defense that Deshaun Watson looked awful against. Just keep that in mind. And I think they're healthier now. 41 points with Kenny Pickett and Tanner McGee's ex. 41 points. Mm-hmm. Why are they able to do that? I know some people are going to learn the wrong lesson and say, hey, we got to go get Kenny Pickett. I don't think that's the answer.
No, that's not that's not what we're saying.
I think the answer is, well, the Eagles have an amazing defense. They have a dominating run game. And it's not that hard to win games when you're the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. It's been like that for Jalen Hurts for years, right? Like people point to Jalen Hurts' record, say he's elite. I'm like, I don't know if Jalen Hurts is elite, but he's good enough to win with, and it doesn't take that much to be good enough to win with in Philadelphia. Because look what they have. They have all of those guys there. The Browns need to make it so it's not so damn hard to win a game if you're the Cleveland Browns quarterback, right? Last year they had that. This year they didn't. We saw the difference, right? I don't know how much different Deshaun Watson was from last year to this year, but I do know the win-loss record changed drastically, right? That was the main thing that was propping up Deshaun Watson was his win-loss record. Turned out it wasn't that hard to win a game with these Browns the way that they were constituted for the last 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And that's why the win-loss record was pretty high for them. But once the defense started to have its struggles, and I think they found their way at the end of this season, I mean, they'll be back to it. I guess Mike Hall is going to be a revelation for this team once he gets like a couple years under his belt. And you can imagine just adding that with Mason Graham. Oh my goodness, just the all Big Ten team.
And double down, get Tyleik Williams in the second. Like,
yeah. I think that's an opportunity there, right? Build that defense, get that run game going. So if you end up in 2026 and you say, hey, Aller's our guy, or Lenore Sellers is our guy, or who else could be? Milroe could be in that class. We don't know if he's going to declare yet, right? Like Milroe could be your guy, or whoever it is. You have a chance to actually develop that guy. I know people say the Browns are snake, but like, look at what they've tried to develop and look at how they've tried to develop it. They've been firing coaches left and right. They've been firing GMs left and right. And then we look around and go, it must be the lake. Well, that's why we can't develop a quarterback. It's not that. You're the kid sticking the stick into the bicycle if you're the Cleveland Browns, wondering why you fail, right? Like that, it's you. You keep making these things happen. It's not the lake. It's not the Browns fans. It's not the weather. It's obvious stuff that you do to yourself. And it's your inability to withstand the pressure of being like, oh, well, everybody wants to fire this guy. Let's just fire him, right? Let's do what's easy. And when you do that for 20 years, you just fire guys. And then you end up with no continuity and you end up developing nothing. I promise you the Browns like decided not to fire like 10 less coaches in the last 20 years. Maybe they would have developed one decent quarterback.
Especially if they didn't keep one and done in it.
Yeah, like they one and done it. They do the one and done, and they get rid of the GM. Sometimes in offsetting years, like, and you just create that whole situation. It's the Browns are the reason the Browns haven't developed any quarterbacks, not because like Cleveland's cursed or anything. And look, the one time they did provide a decent like landing spot for a quarterback, ended up being like the best success they've had with drafting a quarterback, despite that guy being what, the third, maybe fourth, like depending on what Sam Darnold does the rest of his career, best guy in that class. And that's no knock on Baker Mayfield. It's just like, just build something around the quarterback and then you might have a chance to develop him. And also Baker Mayfield was kind of a victim of the whole, like, let's fire the coach thing, right? Like 3 different coaches, 4 different offensive coordinators. That led to friction when Kevin got in there, had a lot of success with him, but then he wanted to do his own thing. And then, that relationship blew up because of all that other stuff. Again, who knows what the Browns would look like if they just would have hired Kevin in 2019 or been a little bit more stable, or maybe even going back all the way, right? If you're not a Kevin guy. What's the guy's name in Buffalo that we were supposed to hire over Hugh Jackson?
Yeah, Sean McDermott.
Yeah, Sean McDermott. Like, there's multiple different points that you could point to. Like, hey, if we just would have made the sound decision there and not been so reactionary, we would have been fine. But yeah, there's a lot there to think about with having to pick. Another thing that I want to talk about is the prospect of trading back. Now, Jacob, you have grown through the same era of Cleveland Browns that I have. So when you hear trade back, it makes me sick to my stomach instinctively. I get sick when I hear trade back because I have seen this team do some of the most ridiculous trade backs in NFL history. But I think it is important to remember that trading back isn't universally the same. There is a difference from trading back from 3 to 6 versus trading back from 3 to 26. Yeah. And trading back from 3 to 26 is what the Browns like used to love doing pretty much up until like 28, until Myles Garrett came out. Like that was the one you were like, nah, we're actually going to draft him. Like,
the thing that always gets me is the Julio one, the Julio Jones trade back, missing out on Julio. That's probably the one that will always haunt me for the rest of my lifetime.
Yeah, and I the theory for it, the thought process behind it is one of those things that sounds really good on paper, but like falls apart once you realize we're talking about what is effectively a lottery, which is, oh well, we need a lot of talent. Let's get as many players as possible, and let's just play the odds. And like, if every draft pick had the same percentage chance of hitting, that would make sense, right? But the fact is that the further back you get, the odds of you getting a great player get significantly reduced.
Well,
so it's a question of finding that sweet spot. Where do you want to move back to? I think one of the more intriguing scenarios for the Browns is for them to end up with the number 1 overall pick and for the Giants to have the number 2 overall pick. Because then there's going to be pressure on the Giants if they love, like, I have my own theories about like how quarterback's going to go in this draft. I think if anybody goes top, it's probably going to be Cam Ward because he has the physical tools, and that's what puts you over the top in a situation like this. And Shador hasn't had enough. He hasn't had any games against great competition or big time games for him to get the bump that you would have to be the all 22 guy, right? Like, if Shador's going to be the argument, his argument's going to be his all 22. You got to have tape against Georgia, against Michigan, against Ohio. So like, you got to go up and be that guy against those guys. Like CJ Stroud was tape guy, and he went 2. Right? And if you want to make that argument for him, he has to have tape versus better teams, and it's the opposite for him. When he plays BYU, it looks bad. When he plays Nebraska, it looks bad. So I'm with you on the fact that I think if any team jumps up, it's probably going to be for Cam Ward, which begs the question, okay, how much pressure can you put on the Giants to want to trade up the 1 to secure getting him, while also not losing a single thing if you're the Browns, right?
Yeah, because in that scenario, you don't want him, or you would just take him. Like, you would just take him yourself, and it's like, okay, I don't think this is a quarterback here. Here's where it gets really interesting. It's very telling what you talking about the percentage of hits. So looking at the which one do I have up? The Fitzgerald Spielberger draft trade value chart. I love that one. That's the one I usually try to go to. It assigns a certain point value to every pick from 1 to 256. From 1 to 256, and you'll see it obviously will gradually go down per pick. The number 1 overall pick is worth 3,000 points. On this chart is 3,000 points, and you'll notice you have a drop from 3,000 to 2,650 as the second pick. So there's a 350, but then it starts only dropping like 100. It drops 150, another 130, and the drops stop being steep. They just become gradually, because the difference between having the number 1 pick and the number 9 pick in terms of hit rate, that's 1,200 points. Like, there's 1,200 points of value you lost if you trade back 8 spots. And 1,200 points on this chart is the equivalent of the 32nd overall pick. So you're like, that's still a first round pick. You've lost a first round pick's worth of equity dropping down like 8 spots in this situation. So I love the idea of a trade back inside the top 10, inside the top 8, inside the top 6. Like, what you're talking about from 1 to 2 is, like I said, it's a 300 point drop. To be 300 points on 350 points on the chart, that's the equivalent of a late 5th round pick. Mm-hmm. So like, you could still have everything you want in an extra 5th. And it's like, at what value do I have to get to actually make it worth it? Where it's like, if someone's offering me a future 1, sure, but like, I want to take a crack at this top 5 talent. Like, I want a blue chipper. I want to come out of here Barry, why not just take Cam Ward? I'm all for it. I like to play the devil's advocate in this case. In your case, Q, I know you're not a big fan, as big of a fan as of Cam Ward as I am. I'm all for taking Cam Ward if you're at the number 1 overall pick. But if you're not convinced, I just don't love forcing it. I don't love forcing a pick at quarterback when there's blue chip talent on there. So I like the idea of a trade back, but I also don't want to just like miss out on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, like to me, the way I look at it, I have 3 guys that I want, right, in this top pick, where I'm like, hey, if I get them, they're going to be enough of a game changer in year 1 to where they're going to make my team better, which we need to be better immediately.
Yeah.
But also, I think they play positions that I think we have a use for, right? My 3 guys, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Ashton Jennings. Like, if I'm drafting in the top 10, I'm leaving here with one of those 3. If I can't get one of those 3, I'm bouncing, right? Because then, Luther Burden at 7, like, I'm not in love with it, right? Like, it feels like a reach. So I would start looking for a value you can get by moving back. But those are the 3 guys I'm like, all right, well, I want a chance at one of those 3. And if I feel like I can move back and still get one of those 3 players in my packet, then I'm fine. Right. The concern to me starts to be when you're moving back and you're like, you might not get, and you're working from a whole different packet, and that just changes the value, right? Like, it's kind of a less scientific version of what you just said, where it's like, okay, well, now if I'm talking about like taking Luther Burton, that's worth, I need to get an extra first or something like that, if that's going to be the case. Because like I'm missing out on one of my guys that I really wanted that could change things. So I need something else to make this hit a little bit sweeter. So I think that's kind of how I view the trade back conversation. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if this is going to be a year where teams are going to go quarterback crazy. Look, I'm going to put my conspiracy theory hat on, right? And I'm going to talk about the 2014 draft.
Oh, okay.
You remember the 2014 draft? It was one of the first drafts that I ever like went all football nerd with, right? I will bring my college roommate up if anybody believes me. He has the proof. I wanted Aaron Donald number 1 overall that year. He was my number 1 guy. I watched his tape out of Pitt, and I was just like amazed that somebody could be that good in the 11th player on the board.
And everybody freaked out that he was 295. Like, they're like, you can't play.
I was like, I don't care. I saw him tackle 2 dudes on Duke at once. Okay. Like, yeah. I was big on Aaron Donald that year, but I remember that year that there was a lot of pressure for quarterback to go in top 5. I believe it was Teddy Bridgewater, who I think is a really good comp for Shedeur, even though I think Shedeur is a little bit worse of a prospect than Teddy was coming out. And then, I'm not trying to say that Cam Ward is Johnny Manziel, but there was Johnny Manziel, who a lot of people thought was going to go in top 5. And then Blake Bortles, who there's just no equivalent to, right? Blake Bortles was like, he had all of he would be like if Drew Aller came out right now. It's like, there's a possibility that if he has a good playoff run, Drew Aller comes out, he's 6'5", he's 235, and he's like working on losing weight. Like, he was like 250 at one point. So it's like, he's giant, he's strong. Josh Allen goes on a run in the playoffs, and everybody, you know how the Super Bowl works, right? Where like Josh Allen wins the Super Bowl, everyone's like, we got to get the next Josh Allen. And now you're trying to draft Drew Aller number 3 overall. That's how that will work. So I'm like, that's what Blake Bortles kind of represents in that class. But I look at this class and I think there's a stronger than possibility that like we are shocked come pick 15 that like Shedeur's still there and maybe even Cam Ward's still there. Now, maybe I'm lower on both of those guys than most people are. Maybe I'm early on it. I don't know. But I don't think I would be surprised to see them drop there. And I wonder what that does to Browns fans, because I'm perfectly comfortable at this point not taking them, even if they fall all the way to the end of the first. And I probably wouldn't even take them at the top of the second. Like, I'm just not there yet with those 2. I don't think that Cam Ward, the way he plays, is a great fit for the Cleveland Browns. And even if you do, like, if you fire Kevin, you bring somebody in who's more of a fit for him. I still have massive questions about what it is that Cam Ward is going to ultimately do. And I just have so many level of competition questions with Shedeur Sanders. It's not even fun anymore. Like, the BYU game was just the nail in the coffin for me, where I'm like, all right, man, like, this can't happen again. And it's a Big 12 team doing it to you. It was one thing when it was like, okay, you look bad versus Nebraska, but like the amazing thing about the Shedeur Sanders stuff is like, hey, bro, we're not letting Curtis Work slide. He looked bad versus Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame.
Right.
And like, I get it.
Those
Curtis Work
teams.
Yeah, it's like, but Curtis Work smacked Nebraska. Like, I didn't see that same level of play versus Nebraska, which, like, Nebraska's not even that good. So, yeah, that to me, I'm just not there with quarterback in the first 2 rounds of this draft. I am team uncommitted to quarterback this year. Let's just roll somebody out there. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to see if you get somebody out there you can elevate, scour the draft, find some guys, have a true competition, figure it out. And, you know, you're just not going to find your answer this year, in my opinion.
Let me ask you this just out of curiosity. Because I see the comment in the chat and on the Twitch chat, and I agree with this situation. If there was a way for you to know that was Kevin Stefanski's pick, like, because I'm of the belief Kevin Stefanski should pick the quarterback. Whoever it is, a bridge quarterback, a rookie in the first, a rookie in the 5th, I don't care. I don't think he has gotten his guy. I think Baker on some level was good enough to be his guy.
If I were the GM of the Browns and Kevin came up to me and said, I think this is one of the 5 best players in the draft. This is my guy. I want him. I'm drafting him wherever you want. Right. Okay. If that's the belief that Kevin has, question, right? Yeah. Then it's not because I like have overwhelming faith in the guy. It's just because, hey, if that's where our football ops are taking us, right? My internal headcanon football ops for me is not taking me in that direction. So I'm not there. Yeah. But if that's where football ops is taking you, if that's what the film study and everything that you pay for is taking you, and that's what the building thinks, okay, then draft that guy. Right. If everybody thinks that he's one of the 5 best guys in this draft, if he's a top tier, like, you think that this is you're not hoping, you believe this is a franchise guy. Cool. All right. Take him. Now, if it fails, you know what's going to happen. Right.
Yeah.
But, you know, give it every chance to be successful, all of that. But, like, if Kevin's coming up to be like, I kind of like him, hell no, we ain't doing it.
Oh, yeah, no.
Like, no, like, we're not taking nobody you kind of like, right? Or I can work with them, right? Or any of these, like, kind of committal answers. It's got to be you're banging on the table and saying, this is the guy who could change everything for this team. If that's what you're saying, all right. I'll go against popular opinion because, like, hey, doesn't matter what people grade your draft after it if it's good. A lot of people are hating on the Jaden Daniels pick. A lot of people hated on the CJ Stroud will trade. I'm not forgetting his name. But
I don't know. Would you say?
It was Alabama edge rusher 33.
Oh, Will Anderson
trade. A lot of people are hating on that. The draft grade after the draft, it's just a fun entertainment thing, but it doesn't really matter, right? So I'll go against it, right? Like, the Falcons feel pretty good with Michael Penix. If it's just a situation where it's similar to Michael Penix, where everybody's like, no, we love this dude. We want it. Even if it's somebody like Shedeur, who I am not in love with, where I'm like, well, if that's the case, all right, we got to do it. That's the move. But if that's not where it's taking you, if you're like, well, we need a quarterback, so we got to consider it, then I'm out. Because it's like, at that point, it's just, you're drafting for need. Right?
Yeah,
like, you're not drafting the best player available. I think that's what stands to me with quarterback, especially in the first round. You got to be convinced that's one of the best players available. If it's not to you, if you feel like you're drafting for need, you're going to make the same mistakes that you make when you draft for need, which is.
Yeah, and I think what Andrew Berry, it's not always worked out, obviously, but I think what Andrew Berry has attempted to do ever since he's been here every year is going to free agency, making sure they aren't forced to draft for need. Now, I will say they drafted for need in a sense with Jedrick Wills because like they had to have a tackle. Now, but there was conversation that they were going to move Jack Conklin to left tackle if they didn't draft one. Like there was like, oh, maybe they'll do this. So, but
and it's revisionist history to act like Jed was best player, like in the best player available conversation at 10. A lot of people thought Jed was left tackle number 1 in that draft class, right? A lot of people thought Tristan Wirfs was a guard. So even then, I think he did, I think it was best player available. And then once you get the best player available, the tiebreaker can be the positional value, right? But you can't go, I think Abdul Carter could be Von Miller. I think this tackle could be decent. Let me take the tackle because we need a tackle. That's a bad strategy, right? That's what you have to avoid in the draft. But if it's all equal, if you think one's Joe Thomas and the other one's Von Miller, all right, well, if you need to tackle, take Joe Thomas, right? It makes sense. But if you have them on drastically different planes of projection, then you should probably just take the guy you think is really good and then let the rest figure itself out. I've never heard a football team saying we got too many good players.
No, and it's like I've heard this conversation. I've seen the comments, and I've had the conversation in the forums and stuff, and in my DMs and stuff. When I take Abdul Carter, I take Mason Graham. Everybody's like, we got this historically bad defense or offense this year. We've got to do something there. And it's like, I'm a very big Kelvin Banks guy. Like Kelvin, the left tackle for Texas, I'm big on him. I'm not taking him at 3. Although the biggest need is one of the biggest needs is to figure out how to protect whoever your quarterback is. He's not a top 10 player. He's not a top 10 prospect for me. He's outside of the top 10. And it's like, but when I'm looking at these blue chip talents, you named 3 blue chip talents earlier when you said, I've got 3 guys. One of them's on offense. And that's indicative of what I think about these blue chippers too, where it's like, you could go out there and improve your offensive line. There's some awesome offensive line free agents and stuff like that. But just don't, I have not yet to find a draft where you force a position if it's not at least close to best player available. Because like you said, everybody loved Jed coming out there because of the natural raw talent. And he dominated in the SEC. And so it was like, we need a left tackle. They didn't need a corner. They didn't have to get a corner when they drafted Greg Newsome at 26, but he was not supposed to be there at 26, and they needed a corner too. So they put those things together, and it worked out for them for the most part. And at least as a rookie, I know Newsome's been kind of a roller coaster. But I'm looking at it and I'm saying the blue chip talent, if I'm in the top 10, let alone the top 5, I have got to walk away with an impact rookie. And the way you're going to get an impact rookie in this class is a guy like Abdul Carter or a guy like Mason Graham.
And I think what Pete brought this up in the Slack, I think I read it earlier, where it's like, if you go back to 2017, right? You drafted Myles Garrett technically over Pat Mahomes. Nobody ever cares or cries about that, right? No. But if you would have took Mitchell Trubisky over Myles Garrett, we would have never heard the end of it.
Oh my goodness. I remember those conversations too. And it was so funny because they were testing Hugh Jackson to see if he was the leak to Mike Silver, because there was that stuff that came out, like they're taking Mitch Trubisky. And I'm like, oh my God, I swear. I swear, but no, it's true. You go out there and you get, if you go out there and you draft Abdul Carter and he turns into Von Miller, he turns into Micah Parsons, because I see a lot of Micah Parsons in there too. And Cam turns into, or not even Cam, because Cam will probably go before that if you're not picking. If you pick Abdul Carter at 3 and Cam Ward's been drafted, and Shador goes on and is pretty good, they're not going to complain about it if you've got Von Miller. And I feel like a lot of times in the top 5, I want this impact rookie and I want him with a high floor. Abdul Carter may not turn into a 3-down edge rusher. He's a little lean. He can still add some size, but like we talked about, but he's a little lean. I don't see a scenario where he's not a guy that gets you at least 8 sacks a year. Just because he's such a freaky athlete, even if he turns into a rotational player like what Obo is, I still think he is good enough to where you're not going to be
Yeah, he
flipping
is that rare kind of like. So what I find interesting about Abdul Carter is like usually the question isn't like, well, who was a good guy to look at this? Like Odafe Owe when he came out.
Mm-hmm.
The question is like, will he develop moves?
Yep.
But really no question about if he'd be able to pick up the weight he needed, right? Because he had like this wide build that you're like, oh, he's going to pick up weight. Abdul Carter is the exact opposite. He has moves. He has so many moves, right? Like he has this little dip and rip, that little run under the table thing. He could do the thing where he runs with his knees hitting his chest like Von Miller and sometimes Miles does. Yeah, like he has all of these things. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's going to be there. He's going to be good there. I just wonder, like, okay, is he a hard gainer? Because he seems like he has a build of a hard gainer where it might be difficult for him to pick up like 20, 30 extra pounds that he needs to be out there on rundowns consistently. I think he has like the patience to do it because if you watch him, he's really patient sometimes and he watches the ball and he waits to react and he's not see ball, hit ball, right? Like much less so than like Micah Parsons was see ball, hit ball, right? In Penn State, where he wasn't waiting, he was just going. But he is a little bit more patient. So I'm like, okay, there might be a chance he could be a solid run defender, I think. But he's got to be able to pick up that extra weight and still maintain that bend. And if that weight comes at the cost of that bend, I'm not doing it. Like, just stay at the size you are. That's the big question for me. I think the combine is going to be really important. Like, how well does he bench press? And like just kind of how he comes into it. Does he gain like 10 pounds of muscle during the course of the drafting? It's going to be hard because he's playing in the playoffs, right? But like, those kind of things I think are going to matter for him a lot. And if he does give you good checks throughout all of this, there's no off the field worries, then yeah, I probably am in the camp of people being like, well, yeah, no, I'm just going to run and take him. But go ahead, man.
I was just going to say, I saw the comments like how many blue chip prospects out of college are elite quarterbacks today. The only thing I was going to say in response to that is I understand that, but if I'm looking to get a guy that's not a blue chip guy, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to do it outside of the top 10. Like,
let's actually evaluate that question though. Right? Okay,
yeah.
Like, let's evaluate that question because, like, I think the chatter will find that the answer is not what they think it is, right? Because the question is, how many? What was the specific question?
The question is, how many elite quarterbacks in the NFL today were blue chip prospects out of college?
Elite quarterbacks, right?
Yes, elite.
All right, so what? Joe Burrow, yeah, blue chip coming out of college. Lamar Jackson won the Heisman, blue chip coming out of college.
People just overthought him. They overthought him is why he goes at 32.
Patrick Mahomes threw for like 50 touchdowns in college.
Yeah. You felt like he was going to be pretty okay.
Well, the thing was like, oh, will it work? It's the Big 12 and it's Cliff Kingsbury, right? Like you had more questions about all of the production because like at the time, I think this is easy to forget. We're getting old now, but like the Big 12 no longer has that reputation for like all the crazy points being scored. But like that was the reputation for the Big 12 and people had gotten burnt on like Brandon Weeden, right? So he was dealing with Big 12 bias. That's why he failed because everyone's like didn't care about all the numbers he was producing. And it's hilarious because that same year, well, the year after or the year before, what was Baker? The year after? Yeah, the Baker was the year after. Baker had basically reproduced those same numbers in the Big 12 with Oklahoma, but since it's Oklahoma, nobody thought twice about it. But when you're at Texas Tech, people are like, "Oh, it's the Big 12," right? Which has its things, right? And you look at like Shador's output or even Cam Ward's, and you compare it to what Pat was doing, it's not the same. And then we're talking about tools. No disrespect to Cam Ward, it ain't even close. Like think about this: both these guys are at the end of their eligibility. Mm-hmm. Pat Mahomes had eligibility left, right? Yeah. Like blue chip, yes, that's a blue chip prospect. What other elite quarterbacks are out there, right?
Yeah.
Let
me think. I'm trying to. I put. Thinking about
Josh Allen, absolutely a blue chip prospect. Like,
yeah, my thing with those guys is like you were not arguing those guys like because I see him saying like, well, those aren't blue chip guys, But you weren't arguing if those guys were first round picks, is what I'm saying. Like, you knew that like Watson and Mahomes were first round picks. You didn't know if they were going to be top 10 picks, but you knew they were going to be first round picks. Lamar was kind of unique because of his size, and we just hadn't seen that work yet. Even though if anybody was going to make that work, it was Lamar Jackson. And lo and behold, he's probably going to get his third MVP this year. But you knew that those guys were first round prospects. I love Cam Ward. If Cam Ward comes out last year, he's quarterback 4 or 5.
Yeah. And another thing to add to what you just said, there was no debate about whether those were top 10 players on the board in those drafts, right? Like, they were clearly up there. There is a tremendous amount of debate on whether both these quarterbacks belong in the 20s, right? In the top 20 of this board. Like, it varies wildly. There wasn't that level of variance with all these guys. Like, it was a question of, do you risk it and take Josh Allen at 1, or do you take him at like 8, right? Yeah. Like, that's the bigger thing here, right? Like, were they like Andrew Luck coming out? No. But like, Andrew Luck is beyond a blue chip. That's what you call a can't miss prospect. When you're talking about a blue chip prospect, that is somebody that you are like, when you're comparing Shedeur Sanders to Geno Smith, that's not a blue chip prospect, right? Like, when we're talking about, hey, you know what Josh Allen could be? He could be like Cam Newton. Oh, blue chip prospect. Okay, that's an alert right there, right? When Baker Mayfield's coming out was Brett Favre, right? When you're comparing these guys and their potential to like S-tier level quarterbacks, that's a blue chip prospect. And the fact is, like, you're wondering if you could get certain outcomes out of Cam Ward. You're wondering if you can get a certain outcome that would be very livable with Shedeur Sanders, but it's not to the level that you were projecting some of these guys who ended up being at the top of the league. I mean, that's just where it is. Especially we're talking about elite guys. Now, if you want to talk about like tier 2, tier 3 guys, you can get those guys anywhere, right? Like, that shit happens a ton. Bo Nix is a perfect example. Like, he's a tier 2 starter right now, in my opinion. And I wasn't high on him. I thought he was a 3rd round pick last year, right? Like, so yeah, those guys can, like, if you're looking for a tier 2 guy, but if we're talking about elite quarterbacks, man, like you don't get caught by surprise by an elite quarterback. Like, Tom Brady might be the only one that in recent memory, and maybe Drew Brees, but even Drew Brees, he was a Heisman Trophy winner in college. Like, he had proven that he was elite at the other level of play. The question was, could it translate?
Yeah, and like, Shadeur's getting all these Geno Smith comparisons and things like that. It's like, and I've actually seen some Geno Smith comparisons for Cam Ward too, and some Teddy Bridgewater stuff. And it's like, if that's the high variance, I don't think it's Geno Smith from Cam Ward. But I don't know. Like, you can easily convince me to take Cam Ward, but that's it. And my thought is Cam Ward is going number 1. So if you're not at number 1, it doesn't even matter to me. Like, just because he's the guy in the first round in my mind. And if he's the guy in the first round, you can't not, you know what I mean? Like, if you're within striking distance of the first overall pick, it's hard to say no if there's only one guy, and it's like, I would be fine with that. But you're talking about, like, you brought this up earlier. And this is why I love the draft, because we say all of this stuff and then we might think something completely different on next Monday. It just depends on the situation. But you talked about, like, building good defenses and winning games. Look at both years that San Francisco made the Super Bowl. And you tell me about what they had on defense.
Look at what San Francisco has gotten away with at quarterback over the last decade, man. Like, and how they've gotten away with it, right? Like, the blueprint is so obvious, right? For teams that don't have quarterbacks, or you want to develop a quarterback into. I mean, this is how Big Ben won his first championship, right? They had an elite defense, a great run game, and they didn't ask Ben to do that much in order to win the games. Now, I think sometimes that gets reduced to he didn't play make at all. Like, it's not like that, but it's like, hey, the amount of times you're leaning on Ben to carry you throughout this, it just wasn't the same as much as it was like in 2007 or something like that, right? Once he got a little bit older. You're not putting the whole weight of the offense in winning on him, because that's not the situation that you're in. Yeah, it's defense matters when it comes to having a quarterback being able to win, build confidence, developing your system, and having a run game gives you a nice cushion. And that gives you remember these scripted plays? We used to talk about the scripted plays all the time. Oh, why do the scripted plays look so good? It's because they're getting ahead of the sticks. Right? Like when they can get ahead of the sticks consistently, the offense looks good. I remember this conversation about Baker Mayfield, right? When Browns get ahead of the sticks, the Browns look pretty good with Baker Mayfield. When they got behind the sticks and you're asking them to convert 3rd and 12, 2nd and 10, stuff like that, it falls apart. Getting a running back, and I think also like getting a quarterback who can run a little bit, I think does do a lot to make sure you stay ahead of the sticks, right? Like, I think I'm a little bit easier to convince on Milroe because of that, where I'm like, yeah, if it takes a while for him to develop as a passer, he's so special as a runner. He's always going to be able to get ahead of the sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're going to ask for him to convert, it's not that like just do mesh rail, a couple of stick plays, throw the ball route to David Njoku over the middle of the field, and you can get a first down as long as you stay ahead of the sticks. We're not going to actually do super complicated stuff. Jerry Jeudy's going to be frustrated, but it is what it is, right? Like, know.
You won a game last year with DTR against Pittsburgh because you could stay ahead of the sticks. You could run the ball a little bit. He had to make just a handful of plays, and his defense got him extra cracks at it. Heck, you beat San Francisco. You beat San Francisco last year with PJ Walker because you kept giving them they kept giving the ball back to them so that the Browns could just kick a field goal. It's like, I understand. The thing is, you've already got a good defense. If you can make that defense really, really good, and you can you have good weapons in my mind. I think you need to draft another wide receiver, but I think you've got good weapons. And if you can improve the offensive line through free agency, get you another running back and a loaded running back class, I think that's the better route. Or the simpler route, to be completely honest, because I feel better betting on Abdul Carter than I do Cam Ward. And that's coming from a guy that has been thumping his chest about Cam Ward for a really long time. I really like him, but some of this stuff it's one of those things where if they pick Cam Ward, I'll be happy. If they don't pick Cam Ward, I'm not going to be devastated. And that should be kind of telling to you, I think, as one of his biggest fans.
Yeah, I also think like, if they draft somebody you don't like at the top, like I always maintain this, we don't know. we don't know. It's like my thing with Shador, where it's like, all right, if they take Shador, like I'm not going to act like I'm going to be like, oh my God, he's going to fix all these stuff. I'm like, all right, man, we'll see, right? But you got to give it a chance, right? If whoever they take there, but if they draft Abdul Carter, I'm going to be excited. Right. If they draft Mason Graham, I'm going to be, because I can see the vision of that, right? Like I am privy to the vision. I've seen it. I like the vision. I would like that vision to be on the Cleveland Browns. But if they have a different vision of it, I'm not going to sit here and dump on it because like it's not my vision, right? Like I don't run the Cleveland Browns.
Can you, because this is where I've come back with a lot of my mocks. And things kind of have changed a little bit for me if they get the first overall pick. I just never thought that was in the cards. But if you're sitting there at 3, Cam Ward's probably gone. That's fine. You say, what is the clearest path to being competitive next year in terms of just what the draft picks are? I say you find a guy that can be Brock Purdy, a guy that can be Bo Nix, and I think I can do that day 2. And you can say Cam Ward's an elite prospect and we're weird, but I just called him quarterback 1 a bunch of times. Comments. But anyway,
yeah, I mean, people are gonna look the draft. Everybody gets strong opinions about things, but here's how I feel about it. If we're trying to get back to being competitive as fast as possible, my personal opinion is, one, with quarterback. Again, unless there's a scenario where you fall in love with somebody, I don't think we should be doing too much to go not address it, like obviously address it, free agency, something like that, right? Like the guy I look at, I keep coming back to, and like I'm hesitant because I think I gotta know what his hand size looks like and like his 40 time. But Dylan Gabriel, like he measures 10-inch hands and he runs like 4.6. All right, like I think that would be a good 3rd round pick there. But also, I wouldn't rely on it. Like, I think if you're the Browns, just make it like this season, just make it easier to play quarterback. And I think you'll be surprised with the results you get, right? I think you'll be able to be, because you have so much here that will make it easier to play quarterback already. In NFL, you're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are. Right now, the Browns aren't as bad as we think. They are just having one of the worst seasons of quarterback play you've ever seen, compounded with bad run game and a defense that did not reach expectations. That's why the record is what it is. But you still have Myles Garrett. You still have Denzel Ward. You have a very competent defensive coordinator who's literally put together a defense that can win a Super Bowl before. And you have the opportunity to add to the defensive line, which, hey, when you see Jim Schwartz with a great defensive line, that's usually one of the best defenses you ever seen, right? Like he's done that multiple times in his career. So if you can add to that defensive line, get that defense where you need it to be, fix some of the stuff in the run game so you have a more competent run game, make it easier to play quarterback, then, maybe it's Justin Fields, maybe it's Daniel Jones. Like, I don't know who they're going to throw back there, right? But maybe it's somebody we're not expecting. It'd be Malik Willis, but you give that guy a chance to be able to win games because you just make it easier to win games as a quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. And maybe you win 10 games like that, right? I don't think that means you just sign whoever's playing quarterback to a long-term deal. I think that means, okay, we got a nest. Let's go. We can bridge on whoever that guy is. And then if we see our guy in 2026, let's get our guy in 2026 and then really get this thing kicked into gear right as the Watson contract starts to hit his low points as far as like cap effect, right? So that's what I think this year's about. Make sure you build that nest. And that's also, I think, the best way to get back to being a competitive football team again is just lean into the strengths you already have. I'm watching right now Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry have career high years. Both those guys at certain points, you could say, oh, he got injured, he's cooked, he's old, right? Derrick Henry's older than Nick Chubb. Saquon Barkley's had more knee injuries than Nick Chubb. They're both the same age, right? Or at least similar ages. Came out the same draft class.
Yeah.
I'm not about to count out Nick Chubb. Now, that doesn't mean I don't draft a running back in this running back heavy class. No, I might draft two. Like, why not? When do you ever have not enough running backs? I think we found that out last week, right? When we were down and running Pierre Strong. Like, no, get as many running backs as you would like. But also that doesn't mean that you got to give up on Nick Chubb, right? Give Nick Chubb, he's going to be cheap to bring back. Yeah, you're going to get a great deal on him. So Nick Chubb, let him get healthy, build this run game out, just make it easier to play quarterback for the Browns. And then maybe when you draft somebody, or maybe you can luck in, like you get Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, throw whatever Will Howard I've heard, throw whatever late round guy you want to throw in there. And maybe you do luck out and get a Brock Purdy. But notice this. Has a Brock Purdy type situation or a Tom Brady type situation ever happened to a team that wasn't good already?
Well, yeah, that's true.
So you got to put yourself in a position to get a Brock Purdy situation, right? Yeah. You got to Tom Brady didn't just show up on the Patriots, and the Patriots were a terrible team. They were a playoff team when he got drafted there, right? Or, when Brock Purdy got to the 49ers, it wasn't a bad team, or at least a bad core. I think they had a bad season, but they quickly bounced back, right? We've seen the 49ers do this multiple times where they get like a top 5 pick randomly, and we're like, oh, they're in the mud, they're in the dirt, they stink, and then they come back up from it. The Browns can easily do the same thing the 49ers have been doing since Kyle Shanahan took the job, which is like, okay, they have a bad year every once in a while. They get Nick Bosa. They're good. Okay, cool. Just do that, right? And if you do that, then maybe you can be one of these teams that gets lucky and gets a quarterback in the late rounds, because you know what? You made it easy to play quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. You gave a guy chances and time to develop, and then he turned into something. But if you keep doing it the old way, which is basically get on our knees, pray, and just hope for a savior to come down to First Energy Stadium or Cleveland Browns Stadium and fix everything wrong with the Browns, and you keep firing GMs and you keep firing head coaches and you keep going doing the same stuff you've done for the last 20 years, well, you're going to stink for the next 20 years. So that's the options there, right? We could do what we've always done in these opportunities, or we could try to do something different. I think that there's something into trying to do something different and trying to approach the situation differently, and maybe realizing you have some good players on this roster. Let's build a nest. Let's make use of David Njoku, right? You don't have to stink next year. You don't have to tank next year in order to be a good landing spot for a quarterback. And you don't have to tank next year to get in position to get a quarterback because you can trade up. You can make these moves if you want to. That's my thing. Make yourself the best landing spot possible for a quarterback. That way you'll get more of what's on the roster. And then when it comes time to actually develop somebody, or if you luck into somebody, then hey, you can probably get the most of that guy, right? Yeah. And then we're fine. We're not worried about quarterback anymore. It can really change as simple as that. But that's going to be what it takes. Look at what, like, I think the 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles are the best examples. Philadelphia's had some down years. They've bounced back, right? Because they didn't freak out and fire everybody. The same thing with the 49ers, right? They've had some down years. Then they get Nick Bosa and they're back again. Okay. Do what they've done, right? Yeah, you had a down year. You were worse than anybody thought, and everybody's freaking furious. Draft your Nick Bosa, okay? Okay, and then see where that takes you. Just keep doing that instead of doing what we've been doing, which is just hoping that somebody's going to come down and coach this team and save it, hoping that somebody's going to magically GM this team and save it, hoping that somebody's going to magically come down to play quarterback to save it. There's no saviors in football. There's just work that needs to be done and rosters that need to be built. So do the work, and then you'll be fine. But that's what the Browns have to do.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's if it's not Cam Ward, if you're not going to take Cam Ward, then you just need to focus on taking a blue chip guy, build the roster, find a guy that can be a point guard. That's it. That's my thought.
And the last thing here, Mike Rodriguez, who's a regular commenter, says the 49ers have been to 2 Super Bowls, though, Q. Yeah, and I'm saying they've gotten there because at some point they decided to build a very strong foundation that made it easier for them to get better quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo is not good. He's never been good, right? But they were able to get a lot out of him because of what they put around him. And that's what I'm arguing. If you want to get to that level of success, let's not freak out, right? Let's try to build around him. I get that Kevin hasn't won 2 Super Bowls, so he doesn't have the same level of job security as somebody like Kyle Shanahan. But if you've seen it work, the principle apply, then let the principle apply itself, even if it's a little bit more difficult to let it happen. Because what also I've seen, right, is the Browns fire guys and fire guys and fire guys. And nobody tells me that that's ever worked. Have we ever found, like, we've had 20 coaches. You would think we have one if there was a savior out there that could have fixed everything, right? But every single one of these coaches ends up the same. Is it because, like, we're that bad at hiring coaches? Or maybe it's just that practice is not great. Yeah. There's a lot to think about. But we got a 3-hour superset going on the OBR right now. So I'm going to try not to take any more time. We're going to kick this thing to Barry McBride and the legend Fred Greetham. Y'all take over. Have a great one.